Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Bulletproof Selling. This is Sean Rhodes here, the Chief Sales Sergeant of Bulletproof Selling and author of the book Bulletproof Selling, a guide for systemizing sales on the battlefield of business. Now, here at Bulletproof Selling, through this grand year that we've been having here in 2021, we have been here every single week to put out the message that hope is not a sales strategy. And of course, we're showing up with top sales leaders, authors, speakers, and consultants to make sure that we can increase the performance of salespeople and the results of their teams. Now, in this weekly selling series, we get to share insights from the top minds in sales across the country and across the world. We've been able to bring in best-selling authors, trainers, speakers, consultants, and those that are actually out there in the field managing their sales teams. And my commitment is that of every one of these episodes, we are going to build a sales system together that you can use no matter the size of your business, the size of your team, or the size of your goals. Now, one of the types of people that we've really had a lot of fun with here on Bulletproof Selling in the last year are those that are coming out of the franchise world. Now, why is that? Well, if you think about small business owners, a lot of them spend years struggling to put together even the most basic systems inside of their business. And I know this because I is one, okay? I was that entrepreneur that for years struggled to figure out I need to do something consistently here to make sales, but I can't just keep waiting for the phone to ring, waiting for the inbound leads to come in on my email account. I've got to actually take the initiative. And when I begin doing that, and I get success, I need to be able to replicate that. Well, that's something that in the franchise world are like table stakes. I mean, if you can't do that, you don't have a foundation for your business. And so that's why everybody that we bring on in the world of franchise has that firm foundation. They've got systems and they understand the importance of them as it applies to their business model. That's why I'm very excited to bring in somebody that's been working in the franchise business a long time, been able to help a lot of businesses scale their franchise operations. Looking forward to hearing him talk about that as well. Mr. Eric Martin, welcome to the show, sir.
Sean, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
It's a pleasure to have you here, man. Now, for the folks that weren't able to read your bio, because it's pretty impressive, especially in the field that you're in, walk us through briefly kind of what brought you into the world of franchise and what you're doing to help those teams manage and scale out now. Because I know, in addition to lawn doctors, you've also got a couple of other irons in the fire. I want to hear about all of them, man. So tell us about yourself.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity, man, and the platform to do that. So I've been in franchising for quite a few years, going on, I think now about 13 all said and done. Kind of fell into it like a lot of us do. Franchising tends to find us. We don't find it, is what I tell my teams. And once you get into it, if you do a good job and develop a reputation, you can stick around it for a long time. But spent a number of years in a home healthcare franchise concept based in Omaha, Nebraska, and was recruited away from there by Lawn Doctor. And our chairman and CEO, Scott Frith, and I go back a bit. And he was embarking on a strategy called Happinest Brands. You can see on my logo on my pullover here. But we have a goal and a vision to become a multi-brand home services franchisor. We have three concepts. Lawn Doctor, which is a lawn treatment company. It's been around for 5 decades. And more recently, we acquired Mosquito Hunters in 2018, which is a pest franchise. And in 2019, we acquired ecomaids. So we have 3 recurring revenue, kind of mobile, non-storefront needed service concepts. We love that type of business model and aspire to add multiple over the years as we further develop this happiness strategy. But what we love is consistency. We love utilizing systems, best practices, whether it's on the support side or the development side. So once we bring on a new brand, we can duplicate and propagate that success across multiple brands and help take emerging service concepts that may be having a tough time adding franchises to their system, but have a good model in place, accelerating that growth, utilizing our sales function, our processes, our relationships, and helping them become ideally a nationwide brand over time. So that's what we do here at Happinest Brands, and we have a great team behind it to help us do what it is that we need to do.
Now, a lot of the folks that we've been able to speak with in the franchise business, if it's not just one kind of person sitting at the top of that entire business model, they're the ones responsible for vetting potential franchisees, getting them set up in their business models. That's one way to do it I've seen. And then the other way is to have a sales team underneath them. So which model do you fall in? Are you the person that's really, doing all the meet and greets with all the potential clients, or do you have that sales team that's getting the word out and helping people understand the value in each of the brands that you're running?
More of the latter. I oversee the development across the brands, and we have pods or teams that focus on the day-to-day development of each brand. So we get referrals in a number of different ways, some organic, internet, portal based and others with kind of franchise consultants or brokers, but those are assigned to our team. And we jump on those very quickly as referrals come in, and those development directors are experts in their field and their model and have a process that they take their candidates through to explore those brands. And then from there, myself or other leadership members get involved in kind of the back end of the process. We have an invitation process before what we call Discovery Day in franchising, which is the meet and greet day for candidates and all of our leadership teams. So we're all involved in some way, shape, or form, but the day-to-day development and relationship building is handled by a development person specific on that particular brand.
And of the 3 brands that you have, do you have one development person per brand, or is there a team of salespeople that's a dozen or 2 dozen or however deep?
Oh, pretty small teams. We have about 2 to 3 per brand. And I feel that's more than enough based on the lead flow that we have, the types of businesses we have. But it's good to have some diversity, but you also want to make sure you keep your salespeople busy and their pipeline's full. And if you spread it out too much, that can dilute that. So 2 to 3 is our model here per brand.
Now, I love the fact that you said that you got to keep your salespeople focused on the right thing at the right time and not dilute what they're trying to do. So many salespeople we see are chasing every shiny object that happens to fly by them on the road. And to know that I'm a salesperson and I'm responsible for Lawn Doctor, or I'm a salesperson, I'm responsible for selling this pest management business model. That's a beautiful thing. And so, in your kind of journey through the franchise world, 13 years now, I'm sure you've seen a lot of salespeople start and it just didn't last for a variety of reasons. So I'd like to know, what do you see are the common denominators of the salespeople that really do well in the franchise world? Are they really analytical? Do they really adapt to systems well? Or are they just great talkers? They're just great relationship builders. What do you find are those common elements if I'm trying to bake a cake and I want to make sure I get the right ingredients in for my salespeople?
It's a great question. I talk to our teams a lot about the first 30 seconds are going to give you your next 3 minutes with the candidate, and those next 3 minutes are going to give you your next 30 days with that candidate. That's the process in franchising. It's a month or 2 for most to research it, and you're not going to sell a franchise, and we don't want to sell a franchise. We want to award them and find a good like-minded individual who is willing to go through that mutual evaluation process. So early on, it's important to establish that trust and rapport. And getting back to the root of your question, I believe great development people are somewhat chameleons. They're able to adapt the way that they speak, the way they engage with candidates who come from different backgrounds, walks of life, areas of the country. You have to understand, in my opinion, somebody's why. Why are you looking to do this? Why are you compelled to invest and start your own company? And kind of building off of that early. So great questions that good developers ask. They take good notes, are able to kind of speak to that candidate based on their individual situation time and time again. It's a long-term development process. So you have to be great with rapport, building trust, continuing to help a person go through a sales cycle. It's not I'm going to talk to you once and we're going to do this type of close, as you well know. So I've learned the greatest developers are like chameleons. They can adjust and they're very driven. They don't need someone on top of them saying, hey, you need to do this or that or follow up here. They're able to kind of manage their own situation and process and maintain a good pipeline. I never want to see a development person having more than maybe 30 to 35 active candidates at any one time, because that's when you're getting stretched a little bit too thin, and in our world at least. So those are the things that I typically look for when bringing on salespeople.
Now that brings up a lot of great questions on my end. I love everything that you're saying is like, yeah, I want to know more about that, and I've seen that too, and so we got a lot of things to talk about. So we've talked about the things that good development folks have. Now I'd like to find out from you, and this could stretch back to the beginning of your career. I'm sure you see it every day now. Where are the areas where salespeople in your industry are relying on hope a little more than they should? Hoping that phone rings, hoping that prospect actually calls them back after they review the material. Where does hope tend to factor in a little more than you think it ought to?
Well, good development people control the development process. We're very structured here. I think most good development teams are. There's a cycle. There's an entry stage, there's an ongoing learning, there's a validation, there's a final due diligence, and you have to lay that out and begin with the end in mind. With any prospect that you're working with, that's very, very important. I think a lot of less than successful development people, they're trying to sell something on each discussion or meeting they have with a candidate. You're setting things up in the very early stages for what you know is going to happen toward the back end of a process. So it's a lot about expectation setting. But Development people, again, going back to the root of your question, hope is not a strategy. I love that term, by the way. You've always got to be focused on building the front end of your funnel and maintaining the back end of that funnel. And this isn't the forum to probably get into the deep details of lead generation per se, but we have different hooks in the water. We try to diversify and focus on what we can control from an organic development perspective, be it website, utilizing paid search, SEO, social forums to create demand. We have a really nice process to fulfill demand, which is getting on top of those leads through omni-channel types of ways, whether it's text or email or messaging, obviously calls and Zooms, things like that. But for good salespeople, they're always mining the front end, getting interest built up. They're always doing a good job of managing the back end of that process. But you have to put different hooks in the water as a developer and have different ways of getting leads coming in to keep your team fed with good activity on the front end.
And I loved what you said about taking the sale one step at a time. That's something that so many salespeople they either forget to do or they can't do. And for what we see on the forget side is that they know they've got a pipeline and they know that they've got stages, but they also see kind of like this is an opportunity. This person's expressed interest. Why wouldn't I try to drive this to close as fast as I can? And of course, you and I well know, especially these larger deals, that's the first thing that'll cause it to collapse. If I've got somebody on the line and I yank them too hard, it's probably going to do more damage than good. And so that's the forget side. I know I can make it one step at a time, but I forget. And the other side is they don't know how. And this is something that you've mentioned numerous times just during the few minutes we've been on already about you've got your stages, you've got your campaigns, you're using omni-channel outreach. Well, in omni-channel outreach, unless I'm just that good at taking a guess, I've got something programmed somewhere, spreadsheet, CRM, campaign system that says, hey, send a text message. And maybe next week, try LinkedIn. And the week after that, maybe send a letter. It's really actually try different methods of communication. So I'm curious to know in the sales development folks you've seen that are doing really well in taking the sale one step at a time, what allows them to maintain focus while not trying to run too fast down the track and cause more damage than good?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And you can only handle so much as a development person to remember so many people and specifics, et cetera. So I think the first part of my answer will be there's always a next step. You have to know that in your sales process. So if it's an early conversation, I need you to fill out our profile and I'll evaluate that and I'll reach out to you to schedule a next step. So that's a homework assignment.
Yeah.
And qualified people that are sincerely interested are not going to disqualify themselves. I've learned that over many years. So if you ask them to do something, they don't do it, they're not interested. And that's kind of that first test, if you will.
Yeah.
From there, you're always scheduling calls, whether your process is a day out, a week out, 2 weeks out. You always want to have an accountability call or a follow-up. So you can kind of set that and forget it and then rely on your technology. In our case, we use a CRM system that took some work on the front end to build it up, but drip campaigns that go out sequentially over a period of time that fills in the gaps, shows videos, links. There's going to be updates throughout the process, but I don't want my development team going, boy, who should I email today? Did I send? Oh, I did. You get into that stage. Now you got a lot of balls in the air and you're going to forget something, right? So you want it to be automatic. Take some work on the front end, but let that work for you on the back end, but always have that next step. A day out, a week out, whatever it is. Accountability is necessary. We all need it in life. Certainly candidates looking at a business, they want to be held accountable and they want to know that they're on a path and they're following that path and doing it the right way. It's our job to lay that out and make sure they're adhering to that.
And how do you ensure that your salespeople then have access to those types of campaigns? Because I got to be honest with you, Eric, this is exactly what I get hired to go in and do for organizations. So the fact you guys already have it, amazing. And so many salespeople say, "Well, Sean, I've been having to do this on my own my entire career. My first sales job, I was dropped in and said, here's what you're selling. Here is a group of leads. Go make it happen." And I've had to develop this stuff on my own. So talk to me a little bit about the process of what it took to get those types of campaigns in place for your people. Because you're right, it gives them a next step every single time, a next step that they don't have to try to invent on the fly when they're in front of a prospect, which is the worst time to try to play jazz is during a sales conversation. So talk to us a little bit about the development of those so a listener could just begin to wrap their head around what do I need to do to begin to develop those campaigns to keep me one step at a time inside the sale instead of trying to, ram it all the way through to close every single call.
I learned from a very good development person years ago that I respect is when you work with candidates, you want to blot out the sun. You want to
No.
blot it out from other companies that are talking to them, because most of our candidates are looking at multiple things, and we want to feed them good, relevant information, but a consistency with that. So to answer the question, it takes some time. Whatever CRM or POS system that you use, most of them have some type of triggering or campaigns where you move someone from one status to the next, to the next, to the next, and different drip campaigns, whether you have 3 or 4 or 10 or 12 within each status, will trigger from there. So it typically is based off of what we're talking about at that time. Emails come out with information that coincides with that. So a little bit of work on the front end to do that. You have to know what your message is going to be, what you want your candidates to see, what's relevant, what's going to get a good click-through rate. We look at those things, but there's no secret, I would say, to it. It's just setting it up the correct way, relevant information, and keeping an eye on that, making sure that it's up to date. But boy, I sure love it when we have a candidate in the process and when they're emailing you back saying, hey, thanks a lot for this. And you can respond and say, yeah, no problem. They don't necessarily know if it's a drip or if it's you sending it personally. They just know you're thinking about them. This is great information. And I've already taken another step toward forgetting another opportunity maybe I'm looking at.
And it's so important that, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, that inside of those drips, that it's not some generic email. I mean, obviously 80% of it might need to be templated, but a lot of it does need to be customized to the person you're sending it to, even if it's just name and geography and a little bit of personal information based on that last call. Because otherwise it's easy. And I see a lot of salespeople take this weapon and use it the wrong way, in that they just invent an email and they think they're running Infusionsoft and they blast it to 3,000 people without even considering what stage is this person in my sales cycle. What was our last conversation? What did we talk about? What personal information can I tag into this? And it does mean spending a little more time on these emails, these LinkedIn messages, and these phone calls and the prep before we pick up the phone. But wow, does it make a difference on the engagement that you get from a prospect when they see, wow, this salesperson took some time and put some thought into making sure that this was going to be a valuable conversation, so that, like you said, they can blot out the sun from all of the competition that's out there.
Yeah. No, I could agree with you more. And we personalize it. Our system allows us to put in keywords and have the first name, for example. And we want to make it look as though it's personalized and it's for them as a candidate. And it is. It's for all of our candidates at that particular stage. But you can get into that rut of, I'm just going to start blasting stuff out, and then you're just going to get blacklisted or shut down, or even opt out, and that's not what you want either. So there's some thought that has to go into that process, but a very important part of nurturing candidates through the funnel and the process is making sure you're staying in front of them continuously.
I love it, man. So the things that we talked about so far, I think the thing that's going to help most salespeople is the idea of taking the sale one step at a time. So let's build this into a system, because I think it could apply pretty much anywhere inside of a sales cycle, whether I'm trying to generate leads and I've got the name of somebody and I don't know if they're really the right person. I've got to do some more research, all the way to, I've been talking to this person for 18 months. I know the name of their kids. I know their favorite color. And I know what business models they're really interested in and which of my offerings might be the best fit for them, if you're in the world of franchise, for instance, as you are. So it could apply anywhere. Now, as we talk about building systems, because as you well know, Eric, everything I do brings in from these high performing troops I was able to study in the military. Everyone had systems that kept them alive on the battlefield. And we find on the battlefield of business, it's those salespeople that you mentioned earlier that have those systems. They're going to be the most successful. So as we talk about building systems, we talk about trimming hope away from a sales strategy. It's essentially what we're doing with this system. We're moving it from a salesperson having to think, boy, what should come next in this conversation? I never want to have that question if I'm in front of a prospect, and I know your folks don't either. So the first T in this system, trim, because we're trimming hope away, is the trigger. Now, because this system could theoretically apply anywhere in the sales cycle, we've got to make it generic enough that wherever a lead is or a prospect is in the pipeline, it's going to make sense for them. So I've got to build something that I can then replicate across leads to warm calls to discovery meetings booked to everything, right? So what's the trigger event for your people if I'm trying to stand up something that gives me a couple of steps within each stage of my pipeline? Is it trying to figure out where this prospect is, what I know and don't know, what kind of likelihood they might have to close? If you're thinking like strategy here for standing up a campaign or a series of steps inside of a vertical in your pipeline, what's the trigger event for you? What do you really have to think about first before you can move on to the next piece?
That's a great question. In our process, simply put, we have different steps, beginning with an initial call, a waiting on personal information, a business program review, an FDD or franchise document disclosure review, validation prep, current validation, and then pre-discovery day. So some companies have 5 or 6, some have 8 or 9 steps. Generally speaking, the earliest stage of your process, you're evaluating the candidate. And like I said earlier, you're given that 3-minute overview, 5-minute overview, whatever that is, to gain that 30 minutes. And then from there, set the stage up for the next 30 days, right? So early, we're building rapport, we're building trust. I tell my teams, you can't put ketchup back in the bottle. It's very hard to have a conversation with someone and get right into shop talk and know nothing about their family, their dreams, their why, their kid situation. So you want to have some of those conversations, and sometimes you have to pull it out a little bit and set the table with the candidate and say, look, yeah, this is a business you're looking at, but I need to know about you before I can see if this is a good fit for you. So if you'll indulge me, let's talk about yourself, your background a bit. Starting there, having good meticulous notes that you can revert back to over time. The next step, that trigger, is going to be, I'm sending you something, whatever you want to call it, a personal profile, a qualification form. We want to see something back from a candidate. They need to earn time with us, and we want to earn time with them, but make sure it's time well spent. So that trigger is they respond back with some more personal information, stating their interest, filling out some personal information. From there, we move into the business model review, which is typically a couple of discussions about day in the life, systems, expectations, who we look for, what we do, et cetera, et cetera. And then you kind of move from there. Every step you take with a candidate, you set up a next call and it gets a little more serious. Here's what we're going to do on our next conversation. Here's what I need you to do to be prepared for it. Here's what the next step after that's going to look like. Once we get into the third or fourth step, now we're going to talk a little bit foreshadow. I never want there to be surprises or a candidate to get to the stage and go, well, geez, that shocks me. I didn't know we were there yet. You always want to kind of get out in front of it a little bit, socialize it, just so you lay that seed.
So it sounds like your trigger event is to establish what your verticals are, or to be reminded, like what are the stages in this sales process? And you mentioned that you've got 6, some people have 9 or 12 or even dozens, right? Some really complicated sales where you've got a bunch of stuff to go through might be a little longer than that. But to know what those are is key, because otherwise I can't develop a campaign or an outreach cadence for that particular vertical unless I know what it is. And the second thing you mentioned I think is really valuable for a trigger is a timeline. You said those 30 days. Well, one of your verticals might be 30 days, another one might be 60 or 90 or 18 months, right? It could really vary depending on what you're selling and what the length of that particular step might be. But if you don't know what your goal is for how fast someone's supposed to move through there, somebody could live in a really low value stage of your pipeline for years, and you just never know, because I don't know how long it's supposed to be there. Do I need to move them out? Do I need to give them a little extra love to see if they're even interested anymore? So to know what the stages are and to have the timeline in place. And I think the third piece of that trigger, that something we don't hear a lot of, but it's extremely valuable, is wait until you get a response to start launching a prospect into a sequence. And this is a mistake that I see a lot of salespeople make that have sequences, is they say, well, this person is in stage X, so I'm going to launch this 12-step campaign on them: phone calls, emails, LinkedIn messages, direct mail. And they could run through the whole thing and the person never ever responds. Well, you're not doing anything but creating a lot of bad PR for your company, because you're just inundating this person with something that they have no interest in. So I'd love the idea of allowing a prospect to even express a little bit of interest. Yes, I'd love to know more. Oh, that sounds great, but I don't even know what this is about. Tell me a little bit more about you, Eric. Whatever that response might be. So great triggers. Now the R in trim is to make this thing repeatable, because I want to be able to replicate it across every stage of my pipeline. So if you were going to break down into maybe 4 or 5 steps, the things that you want to make sure are done in every stage of your pipeline to make sure your salespeople take the sale one step at a time. They don't try to, jam it all the way to close in one call and burn a lot of bridges. What are the things you would want to remind them to do in every campaign, regardless of where someone was in your pipeline?
I think one thing that comes to mind is the first thing you want to ask is, how are we feeling at this point? Before we get into the meat and potatoes of today's discussion, any questions from our last conversation, whatever that was.
Recap. Yeah.
Recap.
Okay.
It's very important. I think depending, again, what you're covering in that call, the model, if you're talking about, the finances or the systems, that's all very important information. But as important on the back end is, again, setting up that next step, making sure they know what's to come in that next phase. And I like what you said about not getting people into a drip too early. We're very big, and this is a little bit newer for us. We haven't always texted candidates, but we have a system where when leads hit our database, they have an email that goes out automatically, and they always end with a question. It's really important. Like when somebody reaches out to us, I don't want them getting a bunch of information and kits and links and at this point, they're just, kicking the tires a little bit. It's, hey, where are you looking? Let me see if we have something available. Or thanks for reaching out. What had you reach out? Where'd you see us? Or there's a variety of things that we have. We change it up based on the source, but we want them to respond before we start to engage. That's really important in the earliest stages. And in that first kind of discussion, I call it the having the beer discussion, because we're just having a drink. We're getting to know each other to see if a second date makes sense. And, if things go really well, maybe someday you'll meet our family through discovery. At this point, we're just having a drink and getting to know each other. How you set that stage and kind of talk people through that process to make it easy, simplistic, digestible. We all know the phrase, how do you eat an elephant? It's one bite at a time. Let's take a bite or two and then figure out if they want to eat more.
Love it. Love it. So that's the trigger. We've got making this thing repeatable. Now, the iron trim, and this is something that every great system has, otherwise it becomes out of date pretty quickly, is to make it improvable. So what are you looking for quarter over quarter, year over year, to make sure that the campaigns are as effective as they used to be, and that your folks haven't just decided to, yeah, I know I've got these campaigns, Eric, but if I can close faster, why wouldn't I? Because I'm incentivized on closed deals, not number of conversations. So how do you make sure that your salespeople are continuing to improve the way that they're executing this and taking the campaigns one step at a time?
Yeah, we track it. We can see in the system how long somebody's been overall with us and how long they've been in each status. So we have a good sense. And we're not big brother. Our development team is very seasoned and knows the campaign's working on their behalf. But we can see pretty clearly when a candidate moves from one step to the other and where we're losing people or where we're seeing the most response at a certain stage. But you got to keep an eye on it. There are certain things that we look at every week, every month, some that are annual as well, but conversion off of certain organic leads coming in, we want to keep that number at a certain level to know, hey, we're converting the right number of people to move into these next steps, and just making sure the campaigns are still relevant. It gets out of date pretty quick. We're doing that right now. Actually, for next year, is taking a look at some of our auto drips and making sure that they still work today as they did a year ago.
Awesome. Still love it. We've got making it improvable. Now, the final bit is real close because you mentioned it a couple times. Is the M in trim is measure. I have to measure the success or lack of success of this system to know, should I continue using it? Does it need a complete overhaul? So what are the things that you're measuring to make sure that your salespeople are taking their sales one step at a time and not trying to figure out how fast can I move this person into a closed status?
Well, back to what I said earlier about looking at where they're at in those statuses, that's a key indicator. When we talk about it a lot, don't skip steps, don't move someone from one status to a different one they shouldn't be, and let the drip work for you. So just talking about that with your team, making sure that they're bought in to that process. Because being candid, it does happen from time to time. You get someone who's going to be hot and heavy and
I'm ready to go.
Right into the last stage. And I always talk about going slower to go faster. We don't want to rush it. You want to go a little bit slower to ultimately get to the end goal, which is helping somebody into business. Do it the right way. Don't skip steps. So just keeping an eye on it, talking about it, making sure that the team's bought in is the most important thing to me.
That is amazing. In the military, we had a saying that was pounded into us, and it was that slow is smooth and smooth is fast. So I think that's completely in line with what we talked about. So, Eric, this complete sales system that anybody can use to make sure that they are taking their sales one step at a time. And I know that it's great to try to, get that one call closed, but there are times, many opportunities where we need to take it slower to make sure this is the right fit. So we don't onboard somebody that ends up not being a good customer and doesn't do anything positive for our brand. So for those of you that are interested in more about Eric, please, sir, tell us about how we can get connected with you, how we can get connected with the companies you're involved in. If somebody's thinking about franchise and the business models you mentioned, where should they go? Who should they talk to? How do we get into your world?
Oh, we'd love to welcome people into our world. It's a really fun process. And if franchising is right for you, we'll figure that out before one of our brands. But I would say probably the easiest way to get in touch with myself, we have a franchise information at lawndoctor.com. Email address that I use and our teams use. We also have a franchise information at mosquitohunters.com. and a franchise information at ecomaids.com. We keep it very consistent. You can reach either of one of our three brands in that way. And an easy phone number to reach me at personally would be 800-989-1903. And I always welcome conversations with good folks that are interested in business ownership.
Nice. And if somebody's out there in the world of sales and they're thinking, I just like the way Eric thinks because he sounds like he's got a lot of great resources for his salespeople, should they reach out via that same phone number as well?
Absolutely.
Okay. Awesome, man. Happy to do it for you. So, for those of you that are tracking us on Bulletproof Selling, make sure you're following us on LinkedIn, YouTube for these live streams. Every single one of them is housed there. Great conversations like the one we just had with Eric. And of course, check out the podcast that comes out of this on iTunes, Stitcher, and Spotify for more sales systems that are released each and every week to help you replace hope with certainty in your sales process. Check out the free resources that are posting over at bulletproof-selling.com. Sean Rhodes here. It's been a pleasure serving the sales community alongside you, Eric. Let's get out there and make selling bulletproof.
Great, Sean. Thank you so much for the opportunity.